Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be a Clone Wars discussion video where I'm going to list my top 10 Clone Wars arcs or individual episodes. I'm planning to do a few of these Clone Wars videos as we build up to Season 7 of the Clone Wars, the final season that's going to be airing on Disney+. I believe they've confirmed the episodes are going to be airing weekly, so I wanted to put out a video like this, covering some thoughts on obviously the previous 6 seasons, so that's what I'm going to be doing here. So let me know in the comments if you want to see me do other videos like my thoughts on Season 1, 2, 3, 4, and just something to sort of expand on what I'm going to cover here, which is, like I said, just my 10 favorite arcs or episodes from the Clone Wars. Immediately before I start, I'll just say that this is not really in order. I'll let you know when I get to my favorite arc of the Clone Wars, but for the most part it's not particularly ordered. So the first one I mention is not going to be my 10th favorite. I'm pretty much going to do them in sort of like airing order, going through it season by season, pointing out the noted arcs to make up the 10. But I'll note the ones that are like my favorites roughly along the way. So just be aware of that there's no particular order to the way I do this beyond just chronological for the most part. So we start off with the Malevolence arc. It's actually very early in the season. It's episode 2, 3, and 4, I believe. And it's our first like multi-episode arc. And I think it just highlights like how well from the start this show did with just doing the simple things of just, it's called the Clone Wars. Here is a battle in the Clone Wars. And it's just this situation of the Republic having to deal with this secret weapon that the Separatists have that has been taking out fleets all across the galaxy, basically leaving no survivors. So all the Republic knows is that it's this powerful ship that's been taking out their fleets. They don't know any information on it, but they have to hunt it down and take it out before it completely turns the tide of battle. Grievous is of course the commander, so we get the focus initially on Plo Koon. He gets taken out, and the reason that his inclusion here is so important is because of course he's the Jedi who found Ahsoka and brought her to the temple. So that immediately gives Ahsoka a reason to want to go out there to save Plo Koon, and a reason for like there to be these sort of connections, because one of the strengths of the Clone Wars was its ability to just bring in these other Jedi characters. The Jedi Council members we saw in the movies, we didn't get much focus on. Who are they? And Plo Koon got a chance to sort of stand out in this arc with his wisdom and strength, and it was very, very strong here. And in terms of the battle stuff, it was very solid. We got to see some cool ship-to-ship stuff. Towards the end of the arc, Padme is brought in, and so we get, Anakin rushing on board to get her out. Obi-Wan is involved, towards the end as well. But, the main focus sort of just being, Ahsoka wanting to immediately sort of defy the Council, rush out, go after Plo Koon, potentially put everything at risk, have to leave the fleet for a little bit. And Anakin just sort of teaching her the right way to sort of circumvent orders, to not just immediately, have an outburst in the Council and try and argue your point, but more of just, if you feel it's the logical option out there in the middle of things, the heat of battle, that's how you do it. And just him pointing out to her that sort of nuance of like, yes, I'm also a kind of more roguish Jedi, kind of like Qui-Gon, and you have to learn the right way to be like that. And it's just highlighting that, Anakin has some wisdom to him. Ultimately, he is teaching her to be more of a kind of instinctual Jedi like he is, and that, that reflects on her going forward, and that's why Ahsoka ends up being such a notable and dynamic character as we go forward, is because she had Anakin as her master. But yeah, very strong initial arc. Is it the most important battle in the Clone Wars? No, but I think it was just a great demonstration of what the show could be. Also from Season 1 we have a Lair of Grievous. I believe this is the only individual episode I have on this list, but I thought it was such a strong episode because it's one of the only episodes or only things in canon that really addresses Grievous and his like backstory, his history. like who he was before the cyborg enhancements and stuff like that. Getting to go into his lair, his base of operations, and see all his replacement parts. See those statues like basically showing who he was in the past. And even though the episode doesn't go into detail in terms of like specifically confirming too much about him, you do still have to rely on like fact files and stuff like that to find out stuff like, you know, what planet he was from and all that sort of stuff. You know, I think we could still definitely use getting the full canon backstory of, you know, how he got injured, why he needed the cyborg enhancements, how it all kind of came about, how he came to be part of the Separatists. This episode did a good job at least teasing some of that, whereas otherwise we don't actually have it in canon anymore, whereas we had the full story from Legends. But yeah, Kit Fisto gets to be the sort of Jedi of the week, I suppose, in a way in this episode, but also his former Padawan Nadar Veb, who's just recently been knighted, and so Kit Fisto gets to see his old apprentice for the first time in a while. They're working together. Just a very, very cool kind of sequence here of just like a Nautolan in Kit Fisto, and his apprentice was a Mon Cal. Just the nice use of species there. They come across his lair because Count Dooku wanted to test Grievous, because in the early episodes of the Clone Wars, Grievous was always sort of running away. He had a few early failures in the show, so Count Dooku wants to test him to see if he is worth, you know, sticking with as the general of the army, and this is his moment to really, you know, show what he can do. And I like that. It showed the kind of cruelty of Dooku testing Grievous in this way, basically sticking the Republic up against him, telling them where his lair is. And there's some great moments here, of course. You see Grievous, you know, obviously be taken by surprise when he arrives back, and he's just completely unprepared, not thinking they're there. But then he gets the advantage. He ends up sort of activating all these traps. His Magna Guards get activated. He ends up, you know, killing Nadar Veb's, you know, clone commander. And because of that, Nadar Veb gets very rash, gets ahead of himself, and thinks he can challenge Grievous one-on-one. He gets isolated, and Kit Fisto is tragically forced to watch on a monitor as his Padawan, former Padawan, is killed by Grievous. It was just a fantastic episode to get across that, like, Grievous is super powerful. Like, only the Masters, pretty much only like the Council members, are the Jedi strong enough to go up against Grievous one-on-one and have a chance to defeat him. So, you know, seeing Nadar Veb go down at Grievous's hands was a great way to sort of build Grievous up again, to show just how strong he was. Have this sort of tragic thing of, like, you know, noting the difference between the sort of younger Jedi coming into their own in the middle of the Clone Wars, and the sort of change in attitude that's coming from the fact that they have to be commanders, versus the wise kind of confidence of, like, Kit Fisto, who is, by the end of the episode, like, has to go one-on-one with Grievous and all of, like, his Magna Guards. But Fisto is able to put up an amazing fight against him. It's probably our best ever showcase of a Jedi using two lightsabers, in that he's using his own one plus Nadar's lightsaber, and he really takes it to Grievous. And, you know, if not for the fact that he was so outnumbered with all the Magna Guards, you know, I think Fisto could have really taken Grievous out there. So really just strong individual episode. I thought was fantastically done. Also in Season 1, the Ryloth arc towards the end, I thought was another great, you know, just example of the Clone Wars showing us, like, a campaign. Here is the battle for Ryloth. It's just a couple of episodes, but this one really showed the different stages of the battle. Okay, they decide they're going to try and take Ryloth to help the people. What do they need to do first? First, they need to break through the sort of space blockade to land their soldiers on the ground. So the first episode is Anakin and Ahsoka being tasked with the sort of fighter jet stuff, and having to break through, clear a path for Obi-Wan to lead the first stage of the ground assault. And then the last episode is Mace Windu sort of securing the planet, getting the allies of the Twi'leks and Ryloth to fully, you know, take the planet. Very, very strong stuff along the way, you know. You get your sort of master and apprentice, Ahsoka learning still early on in the show from Anakin. Very strong start with the ship-to-ship stuff. Then Obi-Wan gets to do the more sort of stealth incursion section of the ground-based stuff. You get introduced to Waxer and Boyle as some noted clone troopers, and again, that's one of the strengths of the show as well. Being able to humanize, characterize these clones, even though they all have the same face, all have the same voice. Waxer and Boyle get a chance to stand out here by meeting Numa, this young Twi'lek girl, and it just really humanized the battle of them having to protect her while still doing their jobs as soldiers and so on. Obi-Wan got a real chance to shine here, showing off his control of animals and so on. Just an overall strong episode, and then the Mace Windu stuff towards the end with Cham Syndulla links into Rebels much later on. Just super strong again. Stuff like that of like when they brought new unique Jedi in, it was always cool to see them. That's always one of the strengths of the Clone Wars, of like, here's Eth Koth in this episode and Adi Gallia in this one. It's just like, even though not all of them are the most, you know, standout characters, you know they're all like council members, and it's super impactful. Especially Mace Windu, knowing how powerful he is. Getting to see some of his amazing powers here was really, really cool. Moving into Season 2, the Geonosis arc. A longer arc here, but definitely one of the best ones at showing just the sort of war and the violence, the tragedy of war. It was definitely one of the ones that really showed you that like this show is not... It was really sort of like a transition point of like, the show is like, yeah, it's still suitable for kids, but like it's definitely leaning more in the direction of like it's really for everyone. And some of the stuff that they're showing, and that like the amount of clones who get killed, the fact that they just have to land in the middle of like a rain of blaster fire, and you know they all get shot down at different points. They all have to make their way to the different landing zones, and like Obi-Wan gets injured. We see Ki-Adi-Mundi having to make his way through some caves. Ahsoka and Anakin have to basically do a lot of the work on their own initially before they meet up with everyone. Then it transitions into the like Luminara joins them, and Barriss. And Ahsoka and Barriss have to, you know, take out the droid factory. And it's a nice, you know, character arc for Anakin, as he has to just sit back and hope that his apprentice can do it. And then when it seems like they've been killed making this happen, seeing how he deals with this and sort of the attachment that he now has to Ahsoka, and how does he deal with it versus Luminara, who I think in a way like represents that sort of almost like cold detachment in a way of some of the Jedi. The exact opposites, basically. The complete contrast of like, you couldn't get a Jedi that more represented the exact opposite approach of Anakin than Luminara in this moment. And that's what really emphasized it so much when they finally made their way out. And just that difference, and that like ultimately Anakin was sort of in a way kind of proven right, in that he believed that they were still in there. But Luminara still had the point of like, you know, what would you have done if they didn't make it out? Like, how would you have dealt with it? And it is Anakin's, you know, that flaw of like, it ultimately helps him over the course of the Clone Wars that he has Ahsoka, but it is adding this other attachment to him. It is still adding to that problem of him not being able to let go. So really good, you know, development over the course of that. And then of course you still have like the Brain Invader stuff as they kind of transition away from the battle. And it just helped to solidify like the friendship between Barriss and Ahsoka, which was great setup. That like, that's probably Ahsoka's closest friend of the other sort of Padawans. And it's a great setup for like the Ahsoka arc in Season 5, and one of the most important ones as like the series finale before we got like the lost missions and stuff like that. But anyway, we'll get to that. So that's our first 4 on the list. 5 is going to be Mortis, and this is my favorite arc of the Clone Wars. I think just overall this is the one that comes together the best, has some of the most unique moments, kind of the most impact and, you know, emotion in a way in it, because so much happens. And even though by the end of the arc they sort of have you questioning, you know, how much of it like actually happened versus how much of it was just like a vision or a dream or something like that, the ideas that it plays with are so sort of impactful that like you just have to think about this arc a lot, and I think it's just so strong of like heavily mentioning the Chosen One and the father, the son, and the daughter all wanting to know and confirm if Anakin is in fact the Chosen One. And in the end, that's what it settles on. This arc does settle on the fact that he is the Chosen One, in that you have like moments like the son showing Anakin the future, showing him what he will do, what he will become. And I loved how they characterized Anakin after this, of just his despair at seeing his fall, but knowing that he will ultimately end the war, and he kind of like agrees with aspects of what he does even if he doesn't agree with others, and he still ultimately decides to side with the son in all of this. It was so interesting to see, you know, that what if scenario of like, yeah, what if Anakin knew that this was his future? How would he react? Would he try to stop it, or would he accept it and become sort of this like in-between character, and so on? Of just like, you know, anyway, what would Darth Vader be like going forward if he didn't become the guy in the armor, more machine than man and stuff like that. So that was great. You know, the moment of Anakin and the vision of his mother was fantastic, where again they addressed the idea of, you know, him not being able to let go, and him being, you know, haunted by what would happen if he did let go, and so on. There's some wonderful lines of dialogue in all of this. You know, we have like the death of Ahsoka, and then Anakin having to, you know, revive her by transferring the daughter's essence into Ahsoka, which is one of those plot points that's like, is that why Ahsoka is kind of so still important going on? Is it because of like, is there anything special, I suppose, going forward about Ahsoka because she technically has the essence of the daughter in her? Or, you know, that's been a key point for people with regard to speculation of like, that was a very, very significant moment. The Obi-Wan gets a vision of Qui-Gon. That was a huge moment. Ahsoka gets a vision from like her older self, sort of warning her about what could happen in the future if like she stays as Anakin's apprentice and so on. It's just very thought-provoking. I think that's what makes it so wonderful as an arc, and it's why when you see that sort of rumor that potentially episode 9 was sort of meant to be related to Mortis in some way, you're kind of like, oh, why did they not go for that? It's a really, really interesting stuff. But we move on. Next up, I suppose number 6 here, the Umbra arc. This one is very, very interesting because obviously we have the introduction of this new Jedi Master Pong Krell. Very interesting character, you know, has 2 double-bladed lightsabers, and the basic idea is that he has to take over the 501st when Anakin is sent away from the battlefield on Umbra. So he takes over Anakin's squad, and there's an immediate contrast between, they're used to the way Anakin does stuff, where he very much has kind of allowed his clones to develop their own sense of sort of creativity, of like, he lets them come up with plans, and they trust that, you know, they can come up with a crazy plan, Anakin will be on board with it, and he'll lead from the front and protect them and do everything for them. Whereas he's very much a stay back, order them to just do very basic military maneuvers like charge in, no subtlety to it at all. So he ends up getting a lot of his the clones killed, and eventually they end up discovering that he has sort of been playing, you know, both sides against each other, in that he basically engineers a situation where he has one group of clones attack another group of clones, and they end up killing each other. And they find out that this was planned. He purposefully did this. And so it all builds up to this tension basically between Captain Rex and Krell of like, Rex has been trying to be the good, you know, commander and help his men, but he's also trying to be the good, you know, commander for Krell. And he's in this mixed spot where he doesn't want to just go against Krell because he disagrees with him, but he also can't, you know, ignore what his men are saying. And so eventually they have to take this approach of like, we have to arrest Krell for what he's done, for being a traitor, and for what he's done. And there's so many undertones, or like overtones, whatever you want to call it, of Order 66 here. But you know they're completely justified in doing this, because clearly Krell in so many ways has like fallen from grace here, that they have to take him out here because this mission is not going to work the way things are going. And it all builds up to the idea that Rex can't bring himself to kill Krell, but Dogma, who was actually the one who was the most loyal to Krell initially, he's the one who does it and ends up killing Krell. But just the fact that it is a clone killing a Jedi prior to Order 66, immediate impact. And then just the visuals of the arc, with it being the sort of darkness planet, and the fact that it isn't, they're battling against like organics in this as well, is another thing that kind of adds to it. And there's just so many of them getting killed. It's another good war arc for sure. Next up I have here is the Darth Maul Season 5 arc specifically. So this is when, after the initial failure of his like first attempt to kill Obi-Wan, this is the one where he comes back. It's Obi-Wan and Adi Gallia at the start. Savage kills Adi Gallia, and you get the really cool moment where Obi-Wan has to face Maul and Savage on his own, and he manages to actually get the advantage in this battle. Again, another double saber moment where it's very clever with the battle, where he ends up sort of kicking out Savage's knee and then chopping his arm off, and then Hondo ends up with his whole gang chasing them off. So it's like, it seems like it's the complete defeat of Maul and Savage, but ultimately they just drift in space until they're found by the Death Watch, and this is where the arc goes from here. We reintroduce the Mandalorian stuff, they team up with Death Watch to build this criminal empire, and they basically take over Mandalore. We have Maul turning on Pre Vizsla, claiming the Darksaber, Obi-Wan coming back, the death of Satine, and the kind of culmination of like that arc of like, you know, Obi-Wan, if she had asked, would have left the Jedi Order, her revealing that she still loves him. Hugely impactful, and it just builds that rivalry between Obi-Wan and Maul all the more. And is the complete setup for the Siege of Mandalore arc in Season 7. So I think there's some fantastic stuff here. Not to mention the fact that it ends on the idea of that Maul has gotten so powerful in the Empire he's created that Sidious decides that he has to move against Maul. And it's a wonderful action scene of finally getting to see Darth Sidious in action in the Clone Wars, of actually engaging Savage and Maul in lightsaber combat, and he kills Savage and basically just takes Maul captive. And this is what's going to be interesting about Season 7 of the Clone Wars, and that they're going to have to explain how Maul comes back into play, in that there's a comic that already covers this, that's canon. So I'm wondering how much of Season 7 is actually going to address the sort of transition period between him being held captive by Sidious and him escaping, and what happens in that comic and coming back into things. Like, will they include any of that, which was a planned episode, or will they just treat it as already being out there and just have him come back? That's going to be a very interesting one to see. But good setup there on that arc for sure. Next up, number 8, I suppose, here, so 2 more to go after this, is the Ahsoka leaving the Jedi Order arc, or Ahsoka is framed arc. I don't think this is the best arc in the Clone Wars, but like, it definitely has some of the best moments. The only reason I hesitate to put it super high on my list would be that I think like the first episode has to be complete setup for what the situation is that Ahsoka is going to get framed for. And in some ways it sort of falls apart when you start to think about it from the start, in that like, Ahsoka's not even on the planet, and the whole reason they bring Anakin and Ahsoka in is because they weren't on the planet, yet Ahsoka ultimately is put on trial for like organizing all of this stuff all the way back to the start. So it kind of loses itself a little bit, but the key moments of just, Ahsoka being framed for killing this suspect, she goes on the run, Anakin is sort of in charge of, hunting her down in a way. The confrontation in the sort of the kind of pipe basically leading out into Coruscant is a great moment of just Anakin, kind of doing, like, showing that he trusts her, but like wanting her to come in so that they can fight for, you know, her innocence, but her knowing that Anakin is the only one that is really properly trusting her right now, that even the Jedi Order have all sort of, you know, in a way turned their backs on her from her perspective, and that when the council ultimately gives their verdict, they do say that like it wasn't a full agreement, but ultimately the verdict is that we do agree that we have to accept that you potentially did this. I think the implication is that Obi-Wan is one of the characters who didn't vote like to agree with this, but it is an interesting one. You know, Tarkin really becomes a sort of more villainous character kind of here, as he's the one trying to prosecute her for this. You see Ahsoka team up with Asajj Ventress. That's a very nice moment. Anakin then has to find out what Ahsoka got up to with Ventress. Another nice moment. And the impact, I think, when the betrayal of Barriss comes out is pretty big, because you struggle to be like, is she dark side? But she's not really. The turn that Barriss has is more of just like, she kind of goes dark, but she is ultimately captured before she like fully turns to the dark side as such. And it's more of just her losing faith in the Jedi Order, which is a very interesting point of view to have at this point, because when Ahsoka is ultimately found to be innocent, Anakin has done everything to make sure she is found innocent, she still decides not to come back. And it's such a big moment, and it was such a like monumental moment when it actually happened, like when that episode aired, seeing her, you know, reject that offer, you know, not take her Padawan braid back, and leave Anakin there kind of stunned and like almost like broken at the fact that she's actually leaving. And the emotion of that scene, as, you know, Anakin admits that, you know, there have been times when I've considered, you know, should I leave the Order? I've been conflicted about it, and she says, I know. And the implication, the discussions about like what is directly being talked about there, and I think it's very heavily implied that it is the fact that Ahsoka knows that, you know, he actually has a relationship with Padme. I think other episodes have, I think, made that relatively clear, that Ahsoka pretty much knows. Maybe she doesn't know that they're married, but that they are in a romantic relationship, and it is something Anakin sort of struggles with. But it was really good, because it was a good example of like showing the Jedi Order sort of like losing the faith of one of their best up and coming kind of Jedi, in that they were basically ready to knight her. They're like, you know, we will treat this as your sort of Jedi trial, and you can come back, and effectively they're willing to make her a knight coming out of this. And she decides to go against them. And you can tell that like the council knows it kind of has made a mistake here in terms of not believing, not having the full faith. And you can definitely tell that part of this is because of the influence of the Senate on them, of that if the Jedi Order was a sort of independent organization at this point, not so linked in with the government and the Senate, that this would have went completely differently. But because of like the pressure from like Palpatine and Tarkin and stuff like that, they had to make this choice, and they had to kind of rush into making a decision on it. So I thought it was a really good decision, and it's going to be interesting in season 7 to see how they, you know, come back to Ahsoka, and that we know there's going to be one of the arcs that focuses on, I suppose, what she's doing now, just out on her own, not as a Jedi, and how they sort of transition, bringing her back into the fold and stuff like that. But anyway, next up, number 9 here is going to be the season 6 arc, the Fives, or the setup for Order 66 arc, the clone chip arc, whatever way you want to call it. This was something we were waiting for to see, in that ultimately, over the course of Clone Wars, they did a decent job at showing you some of like Palpatine's kind of scheming in the background. They did a surprising amount of moments where they'd cut to like back to, you know, Sidious being revealed to be behind some sort of a thing in all of this, and this was probably one of the best ones, in that, you know, coming across the idea of like, you know, a clone where basically Order 66 activates early, a Jedi is gunned down after seemingly nothing going wrong. Just randomly, a Jedi is killed by a clone. Why did this happen? Go back to Kamino, investigate it, and we find out that all clones have this sort of biological chip that is sort of implanted into them at a certain stage of development, and this is effectively what causes Order 66 to activate in all of them. That if they don't have this in, Order 66 is avoided. That it is this programming thing because of this chip. That's what Order 66 is. And Fives basically finds this conspiracy, and because he's effectively on his own, how does he try and get the truth out? And the fact that they went as far as to basically actually have Palpatine kind of take the risk of like telling the truth to Fives, and then trusting that no one will believe some of the crazy stuff being spouted by a clone trooper as he's on the run. And then the fact that like him trying to prove to everyone that this is the case, he gets his own chip removed and ultimately at the end is killed. It's a super, tragic, arc basically of the, you get so behind Fives because we've seen him in all these other episodes. The build up from all of these clone centric episodes, he's been in a lot of them, and here he is in this moment where he just wants the others to believe him, and he gets so lost in it that he is forced to sort of be gunned down. It's a very sort of tragic moment that he was like this close to revealing the kind of truth to everyone. But it was an important episode, I think, to have to confirm to us that after all of these episodes kind of showing the sort of good sides of the clones and the characterization of them, that Order 66 isn't just this kind of thing where, they decide to believe the Emperor, that it is a programming thing built in. So you can't be too sort of like, oh, the clones become villains, they were villains all along or anything like that. No, it is a programming thing. So it was Palpatine behind it all basically, and I think this is just a fantastic arc. Last one, of course, has to be the Yoda arc at the end of the series, the last episodes we have up until now. The Yoda and the sort of Force Priestess arc, or whatever you want to call it, Yoda being trained by Qui-Gon, his quest to learn the ability to become one with the Force. Again, kind of like Mortis, it's one of the few episodes that really delves into the lore, the mythology, the nature of the Force. We get some very interesting things in terms of his sort of the trials that he has to undergo to learn the secret of this technique. And I just love the way that they do it. It's really well done with him, going to Dagobah. He actually gets Anakin's help and like takes R2 for a while and like has Anakin sort of lie for him as he sort of sneaks away from everyone who's concerned about the way he's been, acting in all of this. It's really cool, and along the way, like of course we have like we get the whole thing of like Sifo Dyas's lightsaber being discovered, and they begin to realize that like the clone army, like there's some weird stuff going on here. Like we know that Count Dooku was involved in the creation of the clone army. Now we found like some of what happened to Sifo Dyas. Like they're really having some doubts coming into this episode. Like it's amazing reflecting on it, like how close they come to figuring out the full truth, and like even like Yoda having those visions, and like Dooku and Sidious working together to kind of use the dark side to kind of take out Yoda. It's just a really strong arc, I think, towards the end. Again, I don't think it's the greatest arc, but I really appreciated them delving into this stuff, the truth behind Order 66, how it works, some of the specifics behind how you learn to, master that Force technique. Even just some of the stuff that it did, like, it was the thing that ultimately, in canon, it's the reason we can now for sure say that Darth Bane was the Sith who introduced the Rule of Two. Like, without a line of dialogue like that in this episode, like, we basically know nothing about the origin of the Sith, apart from legends. So, yeah. They're my top 10 arcs or episodes from the Clone Wars. Obviously not in order necessarily, but like I said, the Mortis arc is definitely one of my favorites. I like a lot of the episodes where we just get a really good, you know, battle. We show all the different sections of the battle, and it's good, it's strategic. They're using the different Jedi, like Plo Koon, Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, that sort of stuff. And the, you know, clone arcs where the clones get to stand out. I like arcs like a lot of the Maul arcs. I think are very good, and even a lot of the other ones. Like I definitely considered putting the Zygeria, the Slaver arc on here to a degree, because I thought there was so much good, you know, character work in that episode with Anakin, and even some of the Ahsoka stuff. It's a solid arc, definitely, but you know, it just shows that most of the Clone Wars is really, really good. I think there's only a handful of like weak episodes, and even fewer episodes that are just kind of maybe more on the bad side of things. So yeah, I'm just going to end it here, and in the comments, let me know what your favorite episodes or arcs in the Clone Wars are, and let me know, like I said earlier on, if you want to see me do more of these Clone Wars discussion videos where I focus more on, say, like all of the stuff going on in Season 1, like a Season 1 discussion, Season 2 discussion, and so on. How much Clone Wars discussion do you want to see? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.